Yeah, and this gives a little insight into the structure of the book, really, because I structure it into these 6 great transitions that we're going through and that we need to go through. And so there are 2 breakdowns in nature, 2 in society, and 2 in the economy. And I'll briefly touch on each. So in nature, what we see is huge breakdown in ecosystems, so degradation of ecosystems. I mean, you've got the Great Barrier Reef on your shores there, and it's literally dying, right? Bleaching, just as one example. So the loss of species is actually catastrophic right now. We are going through the 6th mass extinction, and we've lost 67% of wildlife populations since 1970, something that took 3.8 billion years to build up on the earth. We've wiped out in 1 generation. So yes, a huge breakdown in ecosystems, but there is this counter movement of restoration, so protection and restoration of ecosystems. And you start to see, there's in fact a lot of work going on through the UN trying to create an equivalent international agreement to the Paris Agreement, which is on climate change, to have one on nature now. And there is a widely promoted target for the world now to protect and restore 30% of our land and our oceans by 2030. Likewise, there's a lot of work going on around deforestation coming out of the COP26, the COP Conference of Parties on Climate Change in Glasgow last year, where we have now more than 90% of the world's countries committed that have forests committed to end deforestation and reverse it in the next few years. So, a lot of movement happening there, and a lot of big companies starting to actually, put money into helping to protect and restore. If you look at the Bezos Earth Fund, it's putting more than $1 billion into the Congo rainforest in Africa, which always gets forgotten about because we know the Amazon, but the 2nd largest tropical rainforest is the Congo. So that's one example of a transition. The second breakdown is depletion of resources. So this is, many non-renewable resources, whether it's water or timber or topsoil, all of these are being depleted at an alarming rate, nothing like what the earth can sustain. And this has been going on, we call it the Great Acceleration, since about 1950, when we've had this exponential growth of economics, of economies and consumption. And of course, resources are finite. So the solution there is renewal of resources. And this links to one of the market solutions I write about, which is the circular economy. So how do we get it so that everything we use in our products and services either is made from nature and goes harmlessly back to nature, that's one type of circle or loop, or is made artificially, like chemicals and plastics and metals and so on, but continues to go back into manufacturing in an endless cycle. And that's the circular economy. Today, we're around about 10% circular in the world. So this is a massive transition. We have 90% of the economy that we need to change from a linear take, make, waste economy to a, take or borrow, make and return economy. So that's the second transition. Those are the 2 breakdowns and breakthroughs in nature. In society, what we've got is disparity. So despite all of our economic growth over the last 50 years, inequality has gone up in almost every country. Even though we've had hundreds of millions of people coming out of poverty, the gap between the rich and the poor has gotten wider. And effectively, the rich are getting richer faster than the poor are getting richer. And this has all sorts of social implications as well. If you look at a book like The Spirit Level, they do the research on this, and they find all sorts of social problems occur in the countries that have the highest inequality, including many developed countries. So the counterforce to that is responsibility. It's actually to to have what we call an access economy, where we take care of diversity and inclusion. And again, there's a big movement for that, but still a long way to go. If you just look at gender equality, if you look at the gender pay gap, according to the World Economic Forum, it will take more than 250 years to close that gap if we continue on current trends, which is just ridiculous in the 21st century. Yeah, but we still have a lot of progress to make there. And then we have the second breakdown in nature, which is disease, which we've learned a lot about in the last few years with lockdown and everything else.
Sorry, Wayne, this is in society, you mean, is it? Second
yes,
breakdown in society, disease.
In society.
Okay, yep. Gotcha.
So the second breakdown in society is disease. We know all about COVID and communicable diseases, but the interesting thing is that 70% of people die from non-communicable diseases. And these are things like heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, cancers, and many of these are lifestyle related. In fact, 40% are preventable because they relate to what we eat, especially how much meat we eat, in particular red meat, and also processed foods, and whether we live in toxic environments, polluted environments, and of course there are things like stress as well that take their toll. So what we want is revitalization, and so the well-being economy, which is again a massive opportunity, lots of investment in innovation, lots of technology going in there, really exciting things happening, but plenty to do there. So those are the two breakthroughs in society. Then if we look at the economy, I talk about disconnection. This is the technology piece. What's happened is that we think we're all connected, but we're not. There are still roughly half of the world, maybe 3 or 4 billion, who still don't have an internet connection. Many billions still don't have a mobile phone or live outside of mobile phone signal areas. So the world is not all connected. And this refers to what we call the digital divide. And it basically is an amplifier for inequality because, technology gives us opportunity. So we have to really look at that gap and work on closing that gap. Meanwhile, of course, many are streaming ahead with the fourth industrial revolution and with 5G and artificial intelligence and virtual reality and all of those things. And so the gap potentially gets wider. So we have to address that. And then there's a second kind of disconnection, which is that the machines start to disconnect us. And this is really about automation. And 25% of jobs today are at high risk of automation, and another 70% at medium risk. So it's not that we want to go backwards, but we have to look at that and take care of that, start reskilling people, upskilling people to be ready for that hugely disruptive transition. So the solution there is all about, I call it rewiring. It's really the digital economy, but it's mainly about using all of those fantastic technologies like big data, like 3D printing, like all of the other things, to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem, right? Artificial intelligence, huge potential there, but we very quickly found out that it's racially biased. So we have to take care of how technology is being used and whether it's being used to solve the problems. And I really believe that it does bring many of the solutions. The last one is disruption, and this has to do with crises and catastrophes, which we've also learned a lot about recently. This is where climate change comes in. If you look at the wildfires, you look at the storms and the floods and the droughts, all about that in Australia, but also all around the world now. And it's costing the world hundreds of billions, of which roughly only a third is insured. So you've got 2/3 of the millions of people who are affected by this just left hopeless. So tackling this and other crises, by the way, COVID is another example of a massive disruption. You get industrial accidents, also disruptive. BP lost 50% of its value within 50 days after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. just over 10 years ago, and has paid $65 billion since. So, you know, all of these have to be addressed. What do we want? Well, we want to move to resilience. So that's the breakthrough. And that means making our institutions, but also our infrastructure more resilient. Some of that is physical infrastructure, like building flood walls and having buildings that can withstand earthquakes and lots of other very practical things we can do. But it's also about how you build the economy, because what we've discovered is that our economy is very brittle in a crisis. Look at what's happened with supply chains during COVID or during the Icelandic volcano a few years ago. There's no longer any slack in the system to take these shocks. So we think we've been very clever by making everything super efficient, just in time, everything delivered, you know, next day delivery, everything like that. But actually it makes us more vulnerable. So, you know, this is all to do with a risk economy, you know, everything that can reduce risk, but also help us survive and thrive through crises. So those are the 6 transitions.